The mansion of Daniel Cross sparkled that night like a palace of glass. Golden lights glowed from every chandelier, soft music floated in the air, and the polished marble floors reflected the moving shadows of guests who laughed, danced, and drank the finest wine. Daniel Cross, only 32 and already one of the richest men in the city, had built his empire in less than a decade. People called him untouchable, a genius of business, someone whose life seemed perfect from the outside. That night, as dozens of powerful men and women gathered inside his home, Daniel smiled the smile of a king, shaking hands, receiving praise, and lifting his glass whenever someone toasted his success. But while the room filled with the sounds of joy, a small detail escaped the eyes of most guests. His smile was empty. His eyes looked tired. And his hands trembled just slightly when no one was watching. Elena, the maid of the mansion, had worked for Daniel for almost 3 years. She knew the rhythm of his life, the way he liked his coffee strong in the morning, the way he kept silence at breakfast, the way he carried his pride as if it were his armor. Tonight, she was moving between tables, carrying silver trays, her steps light and quiet, like a shadow among glittering people. She was invisible to most, as maids often were, but her eyes missed nothing. She saw Daniel excuse himself from a group of investors and slip out of the main hall. There was no reason for him to leave his own party when the guests were here for him. Something in his movement caught her attention. His shoulders were heavy, and his steps were slow, almost painful. Elena hesitated, then followed at a distance. The noise of the party softened behind her as she entered the long hallway that led to Daniel's private study. The hallway was dark compared to the Golden Hall, lined with paintings of stern ancestors and tall windows that showed the cold night outside. Daniel pushed the study door half shut but not fully closed, and Elena, curious and worried, stopped near the corner. She should have returned to the hall. A maid had no right to spy on her master. Yet something inside told her this moment was different, dangerous even. Through the narrow space between the door and the frame, she saw him. Daniel was not the man of power everyone thought he was. Inside the quiet study, his mask fell away. He collapsed into the leather chair behind his desk, his head dropping into his hands. The weight of his body seemed too heavy for him. He looked pale, almost sick. He reached for a glass of whiskey on the desk, but his hand shook so badly that half the liquid spilled onto the papers. He didn't even notice. His lips moved, and at first Elena thought he was praying. But then the words reached her. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice cracked and broken. "Tomorrow, I lose everything." Elena froze, her heart beating fast. Lose everything? What could that mean for a man like him? He had wealth, power, endless houses, cars, and companies. His name was in the news, his face on magazine covers. What could bring him to such despair? She stepped back slowly, trying not to make a sound, but her mind raced with questions. Inside the room, Daniel leaned back and stared at the ceiling. His face looked haunted. He whispered again, softer this time, like he was afraid the walls would betray him. "They are coming for me, and when they strike, no one will stand by me." The words sent chills through Elena's body. Who was coming for him? Enemies? Competitors? The law? She wanted to run, to escape the dark secret she had just heard, but her legs refused to move. The man everyone envied, the man the whole city admired, was sitting only feet away, destroyed by something unseen. Back in the main hall, the laughter grew louder. Music swelled, glasses clinked, and people cheered Daniel's name. They had no idea that their host was hiding in his study, falling apart. Elena knew this was not something she could ignore. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough to break a man like Daniel. Her hands tightened on the tray she still carried, and she stepped back into the shadows. For the rest of the night, she moved silently among the guests, but her thoughts were not on her work. They were locked inside the study, replaying Daniel's broken words. She tried to push them aside, telling herself she was just a maid, that it was none of her concern. But the whisper would not leave her mind. "Tomorrow, I lose everything." As the party continued, Elena noticed other strange things. A tall man in a dark suit lingered near the back of the hall, not speaking to anyone, his eyes always on Daniel. A woman with sharp eyes, dressed in red, slipped a folded note into the pocket of one of Daniel's business partners. Each detail, small as it seemed, fed the unease growing inside Elena. Something was not right, and tomorrow, something terrible was waiting. By midnight, when the last toast was raised and the final dance ended, Daniel returned briefly to the hall, his smile painted back on his face. No one noticed the crack in his voice as he thanked the guests. They cheered and clapped, believing they were celebrating the life of a man who had everything. Only Elena knew the truth, or at least a piece of it. She kept her eyes on him, her heart heavy with the secret she had overheard. When the mansion grew quiet, and the guests left in their shining cars, Elena walked past the study one last time. The door was closed now. Behind it, Daniel's shadow moved across the window, restless, pacing like a man trapped. Elena pressed her hand against the cold wood for a second, then pulled away quickly. She whispered to herself, "What secret are you hiding, sir?" And with that, the night ended. But for Elena, the whisper she had heard would not fade. It was only the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. The night after the grand party, the mansion felt colder and darker than ever. Elena, the maid, worked quietly in the halls, dusting the gold-framed mirrors and cleaning away the leftovers of spilled wine and broken glasses. Yet her mind was not on the work. Her mind was stuck on the words she had overheard from Daniel Cross's own mouth. "Tomorrow, I lose everything." She kept hearing it in her head, again and again. A young millionaire, loved by society, respected by politicians, admired by businessmen. How could he lose everything overnight? As she walked past Daniel's study, she noticed the door slightly open. The light inside was dim, a single lamp burning on the desk. Something unusual caught her eyes, an envelope, sealed but not hidden, lying in the open. Daniel's handwriting was clear on it. The words written across the front made her heart skip. "Final will, in case of tomorrow." Elena froze. Every instinct told her to walk away. It was none of her business. A maid's duty was to clean, to serve, and to stay silent. But the whisper she had overheard, and now this envelope, it pulled her curiosity like a rope tied around her chest. Her hand trembled as she stepped closer. She didn't open the envelope at first. She only touched it, feeling the paper crinkle under her fingertips. Then, as if fate itself guided her, the flap gave way, and the letter slid into her hand. Inside, the words were short, but heavy like stone. Daniel wrote that his company was drowning in secret debts. He had made investments in risky projects, and the empire everyone admired was already collapsing. By morning, the newspapers would expose him. Lawsuits would follow. His wealth, his reputation, even his freedom, gone. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the page, written in rushed strokes, was something darker. "If I cannot save what is mine, then I will end it before the world takes it from me." Elena gasped. She dropped the letter, her hands shaking. End it. Did he mean his life? She had worked in the mansion for 2 years, always silent, always invisible to him. But in that moment, she felt the weight of his secret pressing against her heart. Daniel Cross, the man admired by all, was not just facing ruin, he was ready to disappear from the world. The creak of footsteps made Elena shove the letter back into the envelope. She turned just in time as Daniel entered the study. His eyes were tired, darker than she had ever seen them. He noticed her standing by the desk. "Elena," he said in a flat voice. "What are you doing here?" She bowed her head, clutching her hands. I was cleaning, sir. I'm sorry." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his gaze sharp, suspicious, almost as if he knew she had seen too much. But then he sighed and waved his hand. "Leave it. The study doesn't need cleaning tonight." Elena left quickly, her heart racing, but her mind burning with questions. Should she stay silent? Or should she try to help? She was only a maid. No one would believe her. Yet something inside her whispered that if she walked away, tragedy would follow. Later that night, as she lay in her small servant's room, she could not sleep. She thought of the letter, of Daniel's broken look, of his whisper about losing everything. She thought of how alone he seemed in that crowded mansion filled with laughter and lies. And then she thought of the danger, because if his empire was truly collapsing, powerful enemies would come. People who wanted revenge. People who wanted blood. By dawn, Elena made a decision that would change both their lives. She would not walk away. She would watch Daniel closely, quietly, and if needed, she would speak, even if a maid's voice was never meant to be heard. The morning sun rose over the mansion, but instead of peace, it brought chaos. Newspapers shouted headlines about hidden scandals in Daniel Cross's company. Crowds of reporters gathered at the gates. Phones rang endlessly in the halls. Shareholders demanded answers. Inside the mansion, Daniel locked himself in his study, refusing to eat, refusing to speak. Elena moved through the chaos like a shadow, watching, listening. Then, as she passed by his study again, she heard it, the faint sound of something metallic clicking. Her heart pounded. It was the sound of a gun being loaded. Fear froze her feet to the ground. She knew what that meant. The letter had been no empty threat. Daniel was ready to pull the trigger and escape his ruin in silence. She pressed her back against the wall, breathing fast. She was just a maid. She had no power, no right to interfere in the affairs of the rich. But if she stayed silent now, the mansion would soon echo with the sound of death. And then it came to her, the whisper. Not of Daniel's, but hers. Perhaps her voice, quiet as it was, could still change the course of his fate. With trembling steps, Elena moved toward the door. She raised her hand, knowing that once she spoke, nothing would ever be the same again. The question was, would he listen to a maid's whisper, or would it vanish like dust in the storm of his ruin? The next morning, the mansion was strangely quiet. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, but inside, Daniel Cross sat alone at his breakfast table, untouched food before him. His usual charm was gone. He looked like a man waiting for something heavy to fall on him. Elena, the maid, moved silently around the dining room, polishing silver, pretending not to watch him. But her eyes caught every small detail. The way his hand trembled when he reached for his coffee, the way his gaze stayed fixed on the floor as if he feared looking up. Elena remembered his words from last night in the study. Tomorrow, I lose everything. She still could not make sense of it. A man like him, owner of companies, cars, land, and power, how could he lose it all in one day? As she worked, she listened carefully. Daniel picked up his phone and spoke in a low voice. The deal is dead. The board is against me. If the papers leak, I'm finished. His tone was sharp, filled with quiet fear. He ended the call and pressed his forehead against his hand. Elena's heart raced. She had no right to hear this, but something inside her said she must. There was danger around Daniel, and he seemed alone in facing it. She stepped closer, pretending to adjust a vase of flowers. Then, softly, as if the words slipped out against her will, she whispered, "They are not your friends." Daniel looked up, startled. His eyes locked on her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his voice low, almost shaking, he asked, "What did you say?" Elena swallowed hard. "I only meant, sometimes the people who smile at you are the ones who wait for you to fall." His face changed. A flicker of recognition, maybe even fear, passed over his eyes. "You've seen something, haven't you?" he demanded. Elena hesitated. Should she speak? She was just a maid. If she stepped too far, he could fire her. But something in his look, something desperate, told her he was reaching out, even if he didn't say it. "I heard voices in the garden last night," she admitted softly. "Two men in suits, talking by the fountain. They said a signature would bury you. They laughed about it." Daniel's hand froze over his coffee cup. His lips parted, but no sound came. For a moment, he looked like he couldn't breathe. "Who were they?" he whispered. "I don't know," Elena said quickly. "But they carried files, thick ones, like contracts. One of them said. By tomorrow, he won't own a cent. Daniel stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His chest rose and fell in fast breaths. He looked at Elena as if she was no longer just a maid, but someone who had just handed him a piece of his own fate. You shouldn't have heard that, he said, his voice low. I didn't mean to, Elena whispered back. But maybe you needed me to. Silence filled the room, heavy and tense. Daniel's eyes darkened with thought. Then, without another word, he left the table and strode quickly to his study, slamming the door shut behind him. Elena's hands trembled as she returned to her work. She felt she had crossed a line. But inside her, something else grew. Curiosity. What was Daniel hiding? Who were the men in the garden? And why was a powerful millionaire suddenly a man at the edge of ruin? That evening, the mansion buzzed with staff preparing for another gathering. Guests were expected, though smaller than the grand party before. Elena moved from room to room, polishing glasses, arranging trays, but her thoughts kept circling Daniel. She noticed how he spoke sharply to his assistant, how his steps were hurried, restless, as if he was trying to outrun the shadows closing in. When the guests arrived, Elena carried drinks through the halls. She listened as wealthy men and women laughed and spoke about business. But behind the laughter, she sensed something darker, whispers cut short when Daniel walked past, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. In the corner of the library, Elena overheard two board members talking in hushed tones. Once he signs, the company's ours. He doesn't know the trap he's walking into. Her chest tightened. They were planning something big. A betrayal. Later, when she passed by the study, she saw Daniel alone inside, staring at a document spread across his desk. His face was pale, his hands clenched around a pen. She froze at the doorway, torn between duty and fear. Finally, she stepped forward. In a voice low, urgent, she whispered, "Don't sign it." Daniel's head shot up. He looked at her like a drowning man seeing land. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "If I don't sign, I lose everything." "No," Elena said, her voice shaking but firm. "If you do sign, you lose more than money. You lose yourself." For a long, breathless moment, they stared at each other. Daniel's hand hovered over the paper. His mind was a battlefield of choices. And in that silence, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Someone was coming closer. Daniel looked at Elena, fear in his eyes. "If they find you here, listening, it will destroy you too." Elena's heart pounded. She didn't care anymore. Something told her the danger was bigger than both of them. And for the first time, Daniel seemed to realize it too. The door creaked. A shadow moved. Whoever was coming might hold the key to Daniel's ruin, or his salvation. The whisper of truth hung between them, waiting to explode. The next evening, Daniel Cross sat in his study, staring at the tall glass windows. The mansion was quiet, but inside him there was a storm. He had not slept the whole night, and his eyes were heavy. Every time he closed them, he saw the shadow of Richard Kane, the ruthless businessman who had been slowly cornering him. Richard wanted his company, his land, and his name destroyed. Daniel knew Richard would not stop until he had nothing left. Elena, the maid, was not far away. She dusted the books on the shelf, pretending to work, but she was watching Daniel closely. Since the night of the party, when she heard him whisper that he would lose everything, she had been unable to think of anything else. Something in her heart told her he was in danger. She wanted to help, even though she was just a maid in his grand house. A sudden knock broke the silence. Daniel quickly stood and adjusted his coat. He opened the door, and there stood a tall man in a gray suit. His face was sharp, his smile thin. Elena knew instantly who it was, Richard Kane. "Daniel," Richard said, his voice smooth like ice. "I trust you received my offer." Daniel's jaw tightened. "It's not an offer, Richard. It's a threat." Richard walked inside without asking. He moved around the room like he owned it, touching the desk, the books, the walls. His presence filled the space with tension. Elena froze in the corner, clutching her duster, trying to look invisible. She prayed Richard wouldn't notice her. "You're losing money, Daniel," Richard said calmly, though his eyes gleamed with cruelty. "Your investors are leaving, your board is nervous, and your name is fading. Sell your company to me, and I'll make sure you still live like a king. Refuse, and tomorrow, you will be nothing." Daniel's voice shook with anger. "I built this company with my own hands. I will not hand it over to a vulture like you." Richard laughed softly. "Noble words. But nobility won't save you when the banks close on your loans tomorrow." He leaned closer. "You should think about Elena, too. I hear she's been loyal to you. It would be a shame if loyalty turned into danger." Elena's heart stopped. Richard had spoken her name. That meant he knew she was more than just a maid. She quickly lowered her head, pretending she had heard nothing. But her hands trembled. Daniel's face darkened. "Leave her out of this. She has nothing to do with it." Richard smirked. "Everyone close to you has something to do with it. You'll learn that soon enough." He straightened his suit and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back and whispered, "Midnight tomorrow, Daniel. Make your decision." The door closed with a heavy sound. Silence filled the study again, but this time it was heavier, darker. Daniel dropped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Elena, unable to hold back anymore, stepped forward. "Sir," she whispered. "I heard everything." Daniel lifted his head slowly. His eyes were red, but there was no anger toward her. Instead, there was something else, pain mixed with relief. "Elena, you shouldn't have stayed. This is dangerous for you." "You are in danger," she said firmly. "I can't pretend I don't know. Please, tell me the truth. What did Richard mean about tomorrow?" Daniel hesitated. He had never shared his burden with anyone, but something in Elena's voice made him trust her. "Tomorrow, the court will decide on my company's debts. Richard has paid off the board members, the banks, even the lawyers. Unless I sign my company to him tonight, I will lose everything. My home, my wealth, my name. He will ruin me." Elena's chest tightened. She had seen Daniel as a powerful man, untouchable, yet here he was, trapped like a bird in a cage. And Richard held the key. "But there must be a way," she whispered. "There must be something he does not control." Daniel shook his head. "He controls everything." Elena's mind raced. She thought of the whisper she heard at the party, Daniel saying he would lose everything. That whisper had led her here. Maybe another whisper could save him. That night, while Daniel remained locked in his study, Elena slipped quietly through the mansion, searching for clues. She remembered the way Richard had spoken, so confident, as if he already won. That confidence meant he was hiding something. A secret. At the edge of Daniel's desk, she noticed a folder Richard had left behind. Carefully, she opened it. Inside were papers showing deals Richard made with the banks. But one page caught her eye. It had a date and a hidden signature. The deal was not fully legal. Richard had forged a signature. Elena gasped. This could change everything. But she had to be careful. If Richard found out she knew, he would come after her first. She returned to the study and placed the folder in front of Daniel. "Look," she said. "Richard is not as strong as he seems. This paper shows he forged a signature. If you use this, you can fight him." Daniel's eyes widened as he read. For the first time in days, a spark of hope lit in his face. He looked at Elena, his voice steady. "Elena, you may have just saved me." But before he could say more, a loud crash echoed outside the study window. Both of them froze. Shadows moved in the garden. Someone was out there, watching. Daniel closed the folder quickly. Elena's heart pounded. Richard's words returned to her mind. Everyone close to you has something to do with it. The fight was not just about money anymore. It was about survival. The night after Daniel's confession to Elena, the mansion felt colder than usual. The party had long ended, and the large house stood silent. But silence in such a place was never true silence. It carried whispers, secrets, and shadows. Daniel had gone to bed late, his mind heavy with thoughts of betrayal and ruin. Yet sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the papers, the evidence that someone close to him was trying to take everything he owned. Elena, in her small maid's room, also could not sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart racing. She had promised Daniel that she would not tell anyone what she heard, but she also knew something dark was happening. She remembered the sound of his broken voice when he whispered in the study, "Tomorrow, I lose everything." Around midnight, Elena decided to get some fresh air. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and walked quietly through the dimly lit hallway. But as she reached the back door leading to the garden, she froze. A faint sound drifted through the stillness, a whisper, low and sharp, like a snake sliding across stone. She held her breath and leaned closer. Two voices. Two men. They stood near the garden wall, speaking in hushed tones. "He'll sign tomorrow," one man said. His tone was filled with confidence, almost mocking. "And if he refuses?" the other asked. "Then we make sure he doesn't have a choice." Elena's blood ran cold. They were talking about Daniel. She could barely see them through the shadows, but she recognized one of the men, the butler, Mr. Harris. Her hands trembled. Harris had served Daniel for years, trusted with the keys to every room. And yet now, Elena heard the truth. He was part of the plan to destroy his master. She stepped back, but the old wooden floor creaked beneath her feet. The voices outside went silent. Elena's heart stopped. She pressed her back against the wall, praying they wouldn't come inside. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then footsteps shuffled, and the men left through the side gate, their whispers fading into the night. Elena's knees shook as she rushed back to her room. She wanted to tell Daniel immediately, but fear held her back. What if Harris found out she knew? He could silence her forever. Yet, if she kept quiet, Daniel would walk straight into the trap. She lay awake until morning, torn between fear and loyalty. The next day, Daniel sat in his office, staring at a stack of documents. His lawyer had called him urgently, saying he must sign new agreements to protect his assets. But Daniel was not so sure anymore. Something felt wrong. The papers looked official, yet there was a detail that troubled him, a name he did not trust on the final page. Elena appeared at the door, pale and nervous. She whispered, "Sir, may I speak to you alone?" Daniel looked at her with tired eyes. "Elena, not now. I am about to lose everything. I cannot deal with small matters." "This is not small," she said firmly. "I heard them last night. They plan to force you to sign. And if you don't," she hesitated, then whispered, "they will make sure you disappear." Daniel froze. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "What are you saying? Who did you hear?" Her voice shook, but she spoke the truth. "Mr. Harris. He was with another man. They were in the garden. They said you would sign tomorrow, or else." Daniel's chest tightened. The betrayal cut deep. Harris, the man who had served him since his father's time, was plotting his destruction. He walked to the window, his fists clenched. "So it is true. The papers, they were never meant to protect me. They are the trap." Elena stepped closer, her eyes filled with urgency. "You must not sign. They want your company, your fortune, everything. But worse, they want you gone. You cannot trust anyone in this house. Not even the walls." Daniel turned to her, his voice low and shaken. "Why are you helping me, Elena? You could stay silent. You could watch me fall." She looked down, her hands twisting nervously. "Because I know what it is like to be powerless. I will not let them destroy you when I can help." For the first time in days, Daniel felt something stir inside him. Not hope, not yet, but a spark. Someone believed in him, someone who was not part of the betrayal. He nodded slowly. Then we must be careful. If Harris suspects you know the truth, he will silence you first. That evening, Daniel pretended to act normal. He sat at dinner, speaking politely with Harris, who poured him wine with his usual steady hands. But now Daniel saw the lies behind the butler's calm face. Harris spoke kindly, but his eyes were too sharp, watching too closely. Later, when Harris left, Daniel whispered to Elena, "We need proof. If we expose him without evidence, no one will believe us. He has been with my family too long. They all trust him." Elena nodded, though fear still shook her voice. "Then we will find it. But we must move quickly. They are planning something. I can feel it." That night, Daniel locked his study and began searching through his files. Elena helped, moving quietly through drawers and cabinets. Hours passed and at last, she found something hidden beneath a stack of old letters, a small envelope with Harris's handwriting. Inside were copies of secret contracts, already signed by unknown men, transferring Daniel's company to another name. Daniel's breath caught. This is it. This is the proof. But just as the words left his mouth, the door creaked. Both of them froze. Harris stood in the doorway, his face shadowed, his voice calm but filled with menace. "So," Harris said softly, "the maid whispers secrets. I warned you, Daniel. You should have signed when you had the chance." The night felt heavier than usual. Daniel sat in his study with papers scattered all around him. The fire in the fireplace gave the only warmth, but his mind was cold with fear. He had just learned something that twisted his heart. Someone very close had betrayed him. Elena entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea. She placed it on the table and looked at Daniel. His face was pale, his eyes restless. "You haven't eaten all day," she whispered softly. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. "How can I eat when I don't know if tomorrow I will still own this house?" Elena sat across from him, her hands folded nervously. "You're not alone, sir. I know more than you think." Daniel looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I saw the documents in your study weeks ago. The deals, the hidden letters. I know someone is setting you up." Daniel froze. He had never spoken about this to anyone, not even his closest friends. "Who told you?" he asked. "No one," she replied quickly. "I overheard. And I've been watching. Every time you left this house, someone entered behind you. I followed once. It was Mr. Harris." The name struck like lightning. Harris, his lifelong lawyer, the man Daniel trusted since his first contract. "You're saying Harris is betraying me?" Daniel asked, disbelief in his tone. Elena nodded. "He's working with Mr. Collins. They plan to take your company, your fortune, and leave you with nothing." Daniel's hands trembled. Memories flashed, how Harris had always been there, guiding him, protecting him. And now, the thought that he was the enemy made his chest tighten. Why would Harris do this? Daniel whispered. Elena's eyes were firm. "Because greed is stronger than loyalty. Collins promised him half of everything if you fall." Daniel rose to his feet, pacing the room. "If this is true, then tomorrow everything ends." Elena stood too. "Not if we act first." He turned toward her, surprised by the fire in her voice. "What can we do?" Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice like a secret only meant for him. "You have friends. People who owe you favors. Call them tonight. Tell them the truth. But more importantly, you must gather proof. Without it, no one will believe you." Daniel nodded slowly. "Proof?" He went to the drawer of his desk and pulled out an envelope. Inside were copies of letters and contracts Harris had made him sign. They never felt right. "I kept copies, but I didn't know why. Maybe now I do." Elena studied the papers carefully. "These will help. But there's more. I know where they meet. Collins and Harris. I overheard them in the library 2 nights ago. They're meeting again tonight at the old warehouse by the river. Daniel's eyes widened. How do you know this? Elena smiled faintly. Because servants hear everything, sir. And I listened. Daniel's chest filled with a strange mixture of fear and hope. For the first time in days, he didn't feel alone. He looked at Elena, truly seeing her, not just as a maid, but as the only person standing with him when the world was falling apart. You've risked so much, he said quietly. Elena shook her head. I risk nothing. But you risk losing everything. And if I stay silent, I'll never forgive myself. Daniel placed a hand on hers. Thank you. More than you know. The clock struck midnight. Daniel grabbed his coat and tucked the envelope inside. Elena handed him a small silver key. What's this? He asked. The back entrance of the warehouse, she whispered. I took it long ago when I worked there as a cleaner. You'll need it tonight. Daniel stared at her in awe. Every moment, she revealed more courage, more secrets that were saving him piece by piece. Together, they stepped out into the cold night. The streets were empty, the fog heavy, wrapping the city in silence. The mansion lights faded behind them as they made their way toward the river. At the warehouse, shadows danced under the dim lamps. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He and Elena hid behind a stack of crates, listening. Inside, voices echoed. By tomorrow, he'll be nothing, Harris's voice said with cold laughter. The company will be ours. And the papers are ready? Collins asked. Yes, Harris answered. Daniel signs them tomorrow without realizing. By evening, his empire collapses. Daniel's fists clenched in rage. He wanted to storm inside, but Elena held his arm, shaking her head. Not yet, she whispered. They stayed hidden as the 2 men discussed every step of their betrayal. Daniel pulled out a small recorder Elena had slipped into his pocket. He pressed the button quietly, capturing every word. Finally, Harris and Collins left, their footsteps fading into the fog. Daniel exhaled deeply, his entire body trembling. You did it, Elena whispered. No, Daniel replied, looking at her with gratitude. We did it. He held up the recorder. Proof at last. Enough to crush the betrayal before it destroyed him. But as they walked back toward the mansion, Elena's whisper lingered in Daniel's mind. A whisper that had turned into a lifeline, a force stronger than fear. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt hope. Yet deep inside, he knew the war wasn't over. Harris and Collins would fight back when they realized what he had. But now, Daniel wasn't alone. He had Elena. And her whisper had already begun saving him from ruin. The game was changing. And tomorrow would decide everything.